In this episode, we deal with the number 2 clue we all missed in the Kiely Rodni case. Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. On search day 13, almost 2 weeks after the incident, I felt like the investigation needs to move to a new location. It's felt like our recon of the campsite is complete, hasn't it? And that there are either no clues or it's unlikely that we're going to find any new clues, right? Recent drone footage also shows, similar to elsewhere in the United States, just how low those water levels are. It's fair to say that if anything large was in that reservoir, searchers would have found it some time ago, right? According to my information, the reservoir is no more than 57 feet deep at its deepest point. That's barely 17 meters. The water is also very clear, so a vehicle ought to be quite quickly visible from the air and underwater. The drone footage we've seen does clearly show just how close to the water's edge many of the dirt roads and tracks lead, but at the same time how shallow the water is in many areas of the reservoir. Because the water is so clear and clean, even if you couldn't see the vehicle, you'd likely see a sort of rainbow sheen of oil and petrol discharging from the engine. So do you see, we can really cross the campsite and reservoir off the search list. But then, just as we turn to investigate other areas, and by the way, one of them is the subject of the next episode, someone from this channel actually went to the trouble to book a camping site in situ and came across a startling discovery. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. Thanks to the hundreds of you who have subscribed in the last couple of days. If you're enjoying this coverage, be sure to hit the thanks button. I'll also be doing 1, maybe 2 live shows, special live shows over the weekend. So wait till the end of this episode for some information about that. And let's get started. So it's amazing when you slow down and investigate things in a systematic manner, what you come up with. We've just, in a way, done that with the couple that disappeared. We found out how long it can actually take to find someone when there's a crash situation, right? Now, obviously, Terry Dean, on her second trip to the area, will be reporting back on other insights in more detail. But for right now, I want to focus on something quite obvious that Terry brought to my attention recently, and it really blew my socks off. Have a look at this. Now, if you didn't get a very good look at it, don't worry, we are going to come back to it. But for right now, I want to talk about 3 reasons why this could be an abduction. So those of you who know me will know I've written many books that started out as missing persons cases, and although the word abduction is part of the common parlance when someone goes missing and very common in the media and the true crime community, it's actually a lot rarer than people realize. Most missing persons cases aren't abductions. When I say most, I don't mean 51%, I mean more like 99%, right? Would you have imagined that without looking at these stats? In an old study of missing children cases dealing with the year 1999, 1.3 million missing children were found or the case resolved in 99.8% of cases. Now, if you take, obviously, what happened with this couple wasn't missing children, but missing adults. If you look at what happened there, was that an abduction or was it an accident? Well, what do you think was ultimately the more likely outcome there, right? And so in terms of these missing children, when they are resolved, it means they were found alive or they were otherwise located, right? Just 33,000 of the 1.3 million number were non-family abductions. And of that number, so 33,000, you might think, oh, that is actually quite a lot. Of that number, of 33,000, just 115 were stereotypical kidnappings involving complete strangers. That's where there's a ransom, where there's lethal intent, or the intention to forcibly adopt. Think about it, 115 out of 1.3 million is way less than 1%. Yet the way the word abduction is thrown around, one could swear 80% or 90% of missing persons cases are abductions, if not more. And so you tend to have a situation of someone has gone missing. Oh, I think they may have been abducted. That's the logical first assumption. Well, here's some news. It's very illogical. It's not the most logical first assumption. So there are good reasons, statistical reasons, to be careful about thinking about abductions, and in general, just for me personally, due to the books I've written, due to the research I've done over many cases. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about that over the weekend when I introduce myself in some detail, and we talk about issues of credibility and some of the books I've written and some of the cases I've covered. It should be quite fascinating, the intertextual element. There are good reasons to be careful about thinking that something's an abduction. I am generally allergic to getting onto that bandwagon unless there's clear and convincing evidence. What you'll often see is that the perpetrators and someone who is like their family member or who might be involved, they are often quick to say, I think it was an abduction. What does that do? It misdirects attention away from them. But anyway, in this particular case, 3 reasons why Kiely's disappearance could be an abduction are as follows. Number 1, she was intoxicated. She was intoxicated and thus vulnerable at the time of the incident. She was also a young female, and thus being intoxicated, young and female, that made her even more vulnerable. Number 2, there are 300 potential suspects. So we don't have a problem of, well, who could be potentially involved here. If anything, we have the problem of who isn't, right? Anyway, although the possibility still exists that no one at the party is responsible and that it could just have been an innocent car accident, the flip side is that there definitely isn't a lack of potential candidates. And that brings us to the third possibility. Kiely's vehicle is also missing. Now, again, in theory, one could argue this one both ways. If the vehicle is found and Kiely isn't in the vehicle but still missing, then an abduction once again feels likely. This appears to be a combination of Kiely and her vehicle being taken. Now, I want to stress that in my opinion, I still don't see this as a stereotypical abduction. Even if it may be one, it's not stereotypical. What is more likely, I feel, is that something went wrong while Kiely was intoxicated, and at that point, it effectively became a cover-up. So I kind of see a accident that becomes a cover-up, which feels like an abduction, if that makes sense. So it's really the abduction and concealment, potentially, of incriminating remains and perhaps her vehicle to avoid getting into trouble. In other words, it's the Pulp Fiction scenario, but with a worst case end result. Now, if you find this line of questioning interesting, we're going to go into it in far more detail, dealing with far more other intertextual cases to see how are they similar to this one, and to some extent, how are they not similar. And intertextuality, which is a true crime rocket science-ism, it's a term I've come up with. You won't hear it on any other channel or by any other true crime expert. It's an invention that I came up with, criminal intertextuality, to talk about what cases sort of resonate with one another. How are they similar, but at the same time, how are they not similar? So coming back to this particular, the ambit of this episode, if you remember, our number 1 clue was that Kiely's phone suddenly stopped pinging at around 12:33 on the very early in the morning on August 6th. Well, often in cases like this, when a phone suddenly goes silent and stays silent and the phone disappears, it's unlikely that its owner, unfortunately, is alive. A silent phone often means its owner is also silent permanently. And that brings us to the number 2 clue that we all missed. I think a question many have been asking is, where did the party transfer to after midnight? And that is an important question. But I think part of the question of where did it go is also, why did it end so prematurely? The timeline is a little unclear about when Kiely arrived. Sammy is also a little vague about when Kiely arrived and also when she got there. As I understand it, Sammy arrived before Kiely did at 9 p.m. I've seen reports saying Kiely arrived alternately at 8, at 9:45 and at 10 p.m. If Kiely did arrive closer to 10 p.m., you can imagine that she wouldn't want to go home barely 2 hours later. Her party was barely getting started. In Sammy's case, the party they'd been planning for months was only on for about 3 hours when she left Prosser. This raises the question, why did Sammy and Kiely leave the party? And also, why did the party itself decamp so early in the evening, barely after midnight? You know, these parties typically carry on really, really late, way into the wee hours of the morning, 3, 4, 5 a.m., right? The fact that there were older 20-somethings present also makes one wonder why the party that had been so long in the planning ended prematurely. Now, the answer may be quite straightforward. Campground regulations especially prohibit parties, this is at this particular site, also especially prohibit noise, especially prohibit ruckus after 10 p.m. So isn't it possible some other campers that were there simply complained? Isn't it possible that, let's ask this question, have the authorities checked the logbooks for who camped there on the night of August 5th, and then just ask them, was there a noise? Did you complain? Was the parking of so many vehicles a problem? Now, according to Terry Dean, she wrote the following in an email, quote, "When I booked my camp spot, the camp rules state quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the camp rules have restrictions on the amount of people, cars, and loud music. It's feeling to me like someone complained and the party broke up to move to one or more other locations." And that's Terry Dean's really astute observation there. Now, have a look at this list of campsite notices, especially right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth one from the top. If the party ended because of an outside influence, it means the party didn't just naturally disband by itself. It didn't peter out. It didn't fizzle because it was late. It means the party was forced to find an alternative venue because the original venue became a problem. It was a problem for the whole party. Do you see that? So if that was the case, what was the plan B venue and where was it? According to Terry, quote, "This scenario would make it likely that others drove with Kiely at 12:30. If her intention had been to go home, a potential second location might have been on the way for her." End quote. Absolutely right. There are also a couple of other possibilities to raise here, but I'm not going to take it further than that. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be doing 1, maybe 2 live streams over the weekend where I'm going to take you through a fair amount of detail through intertextualities, and then also we're going to decide what is our working theory, what is a valid, credible, reasonable, justified, fact-based working theory, basically 15, 16 days into Kiely's disappearance. What likely happened based on what we know with 16 days worth of investigation. So look out for that coming up on Saturday, maybe Sunday as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.